Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister.
And I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
Nathan, when the topic of beauty comes up in theological discussions, where does your mind go usually?
Oh,
Just
okay.
curious.
Yeah, so I think of beauty as, I think of worship as our natural response to beauty. So beauty is the thing that makes us be like, ooh, wow, or wow. That kind of
Right.
inspired. And that is not necessarily visual. It often is. It can be musical. There's a whole range of things. But I think, or for me, the weaving together of complex ideas in a new way that I see some fundamental integration between things that I've never noticed before often inspires that in me. So I think beauty is the thing that triggers worship.
Beauty is the thing that triggers worship. I think
I
that's
don't know.
a very holistic way. Yeah, no, I do. I think it's a very holistic way of looking at it. I think,
and you're going to say that most people don't look at it like that.
No, most people don't look at it like that. At least I don't think so. So I think what's interesting is that for a long time, discussions of beauty, I think in the past were probably more along the lines that you've just spelled out, Nathan. They had to do with a holistic response to goodness, the goodness of God's world surrounding us.
Well, leave it to me to represent the 1750s well. That's the role I play in this world.
But in recent years, though, there's been a surge of explorations of artistic beauty in theological circles. And that's a relatively recent development. And this is where you've got a lot of good, but you also have some drawbacks. And that's why I want to look at at beauty under this, this theological lens for a second. I think back when Will Durness, who taught for years at Fuller Theological Seminary, was professor there, had a missionary background actually to the Philippines. He was one of the he was a pioneer of theology and the intersection of theology and artistic beauty. He was doing that at a time where there really wasn't much of a precedent for it. And that was, I believe he did his dissertation in the 1970s. Now, Francis Schaeffer was also, we have to count him as a pioneer here as well. He was talking about a lot of modern art, actually. Now, you've had, of course, Christians talking about, beauty for a long, long time. Classical art and Renaissance art and all of that. But Christianity was relatively silent on modern art. So that's the other distinction here. So Will Durness was writing about modern artists, and Francis Schaeffer touched even on filmmakers. He talked about somebody like an Ingmar Bergman, for instance. He talked about an abstract painter like a Picasso, for instance, and that was new. But there's been
hang on. Can I interrupt here?
Since
I have a question.
Please
question
do.
Time. Yeah. So I outlined a vision of beauty that had to do with integration. And is there a sense in which, is it too simplistic to say that a lot of modern art has focused on the disintegration or the warping of? Yeah, so I wouldn't know. So I'm definitely not in the category of saying that all art is beautiful. I'm just wondering if there's a
right. We'll get to
distinction that. Okay, cool. As long as we get there.
Right. Yeah, let's get there. But hold on one sec. So, yeah, there's been a growing theological literature looking at beauty, looking at the role of beauty in the gospel, for instance. And this literature has gained in subtlety and sophistication, and a lot of it looks at contemporary art. So that's all well and good. But here's the drawback, and this will take us into a direct response to what you were just bringing up there, Nathan, about disintegration. So one of the issues that arises here is that, first of all, when you see beauty in these contexts, it tends to get tied exclusively to artistic expression, almost as a kind of default setting. I'm not saying that people necessarily do that. I'm saying when you see beauty show up in some theological discussions, or we think about a question like, what is the role of beauty in our gospel presentation? I think the temptation is often to tie it to what I'd like to call the institution of the fine arts. And that's just a big phrase to include a number of different practices that could include everything from painting and sculpture to literature and poetry and
Classical music.
filmmaking and and music, yep, and even architecture. So that's one important. So obviously, that's an important aspect, can be an important aspect of beauty. But most people recognize on an intuitive level that of course, artists do not have a monopoly on beauty. It's also a bit of an elitist view because those who tend to make it into the institution of, the Institute of Fine Arts, in whatever sphere, usually it requires a high level of skill and training, and you've got to have exquisite taste. And so that's a guild of people who often do produce a bounty, but it's certainly not everyone. And I think going back to what Nathan said, to what you said earlier about moments of worship, I mean, think about just everyday events like staring up at the night sky on a camping trip where you're looking into the sky and the heavens with no light pollution, or
Mm-hmm.
just seeing your kid leaping through a sprinkler on a summer day. Now, these are marvelously beautiful moments, and they show very clearly that beauty goes well beyond the gallery. So there's that elitism piece that I think worries a lot of people. I bring this up because I think, Nathan, there's a lot of distrust that I find and suspicion surrounding the word beauty. But the other one has to do with what you were talking about with disintegration. And here's where, so I think there's the elitism piece is one where, not everybody's part of that club. But the other is that so much modern art or contemporary art is not only is it not beautiful, it is aggressively ugly and often
There's a combination of words for
hostile.
you. Aggressively ugly.
Right, and aggressively ugly. I mean, hostile to beauty. This is what Roger Scruton calls this, a lot of modern art, a flight from beauty. So if formerly you had artists who would give you representations of, say, the human body, the human form, and it was a celebration of the human form as the pinnacle of God's creation, for instance, a human being made in the image of God. Now what
David's
you see coming out of art
Michelangelo,
schools,
that kind of thing.
that's the paradigm example right there. Yes. But now what you see being turned out of a lot of art schools.
Michelangelo's David. David didn't make a Michelangelo. Glad we got that sorted out.
Michelangelo's. Yeah, we figured that out there. But what you see now is a picture of disintegration. It is a picture of distortion or disfigurement. So I'll just pause there for a second and just say, yes, that's true. It's not true of all contemporary art. It's not true of all modern art. Now, I'll give you some, and I'm happy to provide some specific examples in a second. But yeah, let me pause there for a second.
Okay, so is part of this skepticism come from the subtle connotation of reducing beauty to cosmetic? Is that part of the issue there? I played around with this idea in a talk one time. I think our friend Sean Hart got a kick out of it just because of how much it confused all the university students in the audience. And I said, because I said, I'm married to a beautiful
university
woman.
Students know everything. Just kidding.
Yeah, I said I'm married to a beautiful woman, and I think she's very pretty too. And or think of a statement like Jesus says in Mark 14, where the woman washes his feet, and with a perfume, and Jesus says, "She has done a beautiful thing to me." Those are usages of the word beauty that are not what we're talking about here. So say something about the reductionism of beauty into the cosmetic as it pertains to what you're saying here.
Well, let me give you a few examples that back up, my wife is beautiful, and I think she's pretty too. Mother Teresa of Calcutta is a good example here. Malcolm Muggeridge, in his book about her, talks about the fact that she is a radiant beautiful person who doesn't look anything like, a Marilyn Monroe, or, pick your current
People don't pay to see
icon
her.
of cosmetic beauty. Right. We all recognize that this is so. Again, this is something that every day, if you're everyday person with common sense, you know this. You know it on an intuitive level, and you know this. You just know this to be true. But there are some modern artists who knew this really well and helped us to see it. One of them was Vincent van Gogh. If I was really pretentious, I would say Vincent van Gogh, because that's how you're supposed to say it. But I can't bring myself to do that. Well, he was painting. A lot of his paintings are, of course, his own sort of stormy personality makes its way onto the canvas. The sky doesn't look like that in real life. The Van Gogh sky differs from the sky that It's not science, right? Fortunately, it's not scientifically accurate, and yet it captures part of it. Not only captures moods, it captures the fact that life is turbulent, and that there is a real sense of fear because this is a fallen world, but that there's beauty commingled with that. But also you have Van Gogh painting peasants, not people of, not the nobility, but peasants in everyday kind of scenarios. Think about a painting like The Potato Eaters. And these paintings capture something of what is sacred about human life in ways that some of the more venerated, right, paintings that were commissioned by very wealthy merchants, or royal portraits don't. And
would you
so
say
in that
that's
sense,
true of like
so I'm bringing him up as
what about like the Tolstoys and
yeah.
Dostoevskys in their descriptions of the peasantry and the family life within, and there's a
Yes.
a nostalgic beauty that's pinned there, not drawn, but often juxtaposed against the affluent,
squalid conditions that they have, and then the affluence of the aristocracy. Yes, so you do have modern artists who can give us a more holistic vision of that beauty. So I want to get that one in there real quickly before. But a good deal of contemporary art is not only it's not just ugly. Let's use some other words here. It's profane I mean that in a descriptive sense. The most I won't say the name of the most famous and easy piece to point to here, but the man behind it is Andre Serrano, who famously submerged a crucifix in his own urine. So that's that. I think when a lot of people, when there's deep suspicion about artistic beauty or lack thereof, it has to do with stunts like that. And that's, of course, that's one among many, many examples that could easily be multiplied. And of course, think about Francis Bacon. I'm not talking about the pioneering scientist. I'm talking about Francis Bacon, the modern painter. And if you look at his paintings, they're quite monstrous and grotesque. So what's happening here? Well, it's a complex question, but one way to look at this, and I'm drawing my thinking here from Roger Scruton. And if you want to sort of get a little bit of an introduction to this, his very brief introduction to beauty is a very helpful book on this, very helpful primer. But he points out that a lot of modern or contemporary art wants to be avant-garde. It doesn't want to be tied to old lines of thinking. So it comes to us and it announces itself as a kind of message from the future. And as such, it's meant to break old patterns of thinking. It's meant to be iconoclastic. So it's meant to be a desecration. To think about submerging a crucifix in urine.
Yeah, so, but is that philosophical, or is it just ridiculous in order to gain notoriety? They're not mutually exclusive, but there's a little bit of me that's like,
they're not mutually exclusive. Yes. So I think part of it is it's just a crass publicity stunt. Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of that, and I think the phrase "the emperor has no clothes" definitely applies to so much of this. That's true of some of it. It's not true of all of it. For some of these people working in these fields, so some of them, Roger Scruton will tell you point blank, this person is a lousy painter. So he really had no choice. I'm not going to name the painter. He does. But he really had no choice but to become a cunning and clever marketer of his abstract art. Right? That is definitely the case. Or this person didn't have that much talent, so they just decided to do something really grotesque and profane and get publicity through that. It's not true of all of them, though. I think so. Let's give the benefit of the doubt. There are some very skilled artists who make some very profane stuff, and they do have
So I
philosophical
would say,
motivations behind it. That
yeah. So
yeah,
I would say when I was in high school, some of the best like street art isn't the right word, but like what all the goth kids were drawing on the floors, huddled in the corner outside their
hmm
lockers, was some of the they were some of the most artistically skilled people, like drawing some of the grossest stuff you could imagine. I mean,
right,
it was
yep.
very, very well done, like flat out impressive. Um, Charcoal drawings of stuff that you should never publish anywhere. So yeah, I'm not denying the skill there. I'm on board with you. Um, because it is a powerful way of
But
communicating what you're thinking and feeling. So
let's try to make some sense of it. We can't make full sense of it because it's a very complex question, and it's mysterious because human beings are doing this stuff, and human beings are always mysterious. We have to contend, of course, always with the fallenness of the human heart when we talk about some of these endeavors. And we need to bear in mind the Augustinian notion that I think is true here, that evil is a privation of the good. So if that's true, then it makes sense that you could have a very skilled person creating very grotesque stuff. And
sure.
there's still a measure of the good in it, in the sense that, hey, it took a lot of skill to pull this off, a lot of
Right.
craftsmanship to do this. Right. So, I mean, I think of one example I could point to here is H.R. Geiger. He's a famous modern artist. He's famous. So, a lot of these modern artists, by the way, show up in pop culture artifacts. So, Andre Serrano's had a whole section, he had a whole series, rather, of photographs titled Bodily Fluids. It's exactly what you think. Well, two of those famously made the front covers of two Metallica albums, Load and Reload. If you look those up, you Google those are Andre Serrano images. H.R. Geiger is in the same category. We know him mainly from pop culture, and we know him because he designed the alien from the movie Alien. And then, of course, the massively successful Alien franchise. Now, that is an absolutely nightmarish creature. I mean, I always look at it, I think, of the phrase fearful symmetry, because it's a terrifying piece of work. So again, it took a lot of skill and craftsmanship to put that together. Now, here's something also, I'll just say this as an aside that's very telling. Very few people, people might put people do put classical statues or little small imitation statues in their homes and pictures of such statuary in their homes. I don't know many people who would put the xenomorph, as the alien has come to be known, a grown adult. I don't know too many who would put that in their home, or a lot of abstract art for that matter, or a still of Andre Serrano's bodily fluids in a frame in their living room. Now, I'm not saying nobody does that. There are some people who do it. Most people don't. And I think the reasons for that are very telling, because they see their home as a place of rest and consolation. And these
Yeah.
highly
Okay.
confrontational objects get in the way of that. Even, I mean, Scruton points out a lot of these modern architects in London who have created some of these monstrosities that nobody wants to live in. He'll point out, if you look at where they live, though, they live in kind of beautiful, idyllic village greens that are, carefully preserved and protected and gated.
All
So
right.
they won't live in that kind of condition.
So is there a sense the type of art you choose to have in your home, and your home, if you see your home as a place of rest and or entertainment, even, that the type of the art that you have classically would be things that connected you to the transcendent? So the Sistine Chapel makes sense to us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or even, beautiful nature scenery, all sorts of, all the way on
Yep.
down. And I think the affinity for nature we can talk about that in a minute, is a place of beauty. A lot of our
Yes.
more
Yep.
tranquil imagery is still based
Mhm.
on the desire to connect with something bigger than ourselves. Some modern art seems to be making the point that there isn't anything that transcends us and there isn't anything sacred.
Right.
So when you put a crucifix in a jar of urine, you are
Right.
saying the opposite of what art classically bound us to. As you know, a crucifix in a jar of urine produces the opposite of worship. So
Correct.
there's a
Yes.
desacralization or a deconstruction there that, yeah. So I wouldn't say it's beautiful. My simplistic
No, and
category, you know.
it's deliberately not beautiful, but what you're saying is very interesting. So the idea of how you decorate your home, I learned this from a friend of mine named Mark Sprinkle, who's written a lot on the arts and
Mm-hmm.
spoke at a conference we were at years ago.
Is an artist himself.
Very incisive thing. He is an artist himself, and but one of the questions he asks people is
Paints a lot of sheep.
when considering the art, yeah, when considering the arts, how do you decorate your home? Because that says a lot about your sense of beauty. Now, it's going to bring us to a problem here in a second, but I'll get there. Let me say a few words about nature, what you just said, because it's incredibly important. And it has to do with the philosophical assumptions behind a lot of this. And some of this, I just want to say, you just submerging a crucifix in urine. It's provocative. It's profane. It's blasphemous. It's also stupid. I think we should just point that out and say that very clearly.
Ooh, the
And
highly technical terminology here.
well, I've offended people by saying that before, by saying this is no, it invites a lot of interesting conversations. I'm sorry, I've been thinking about this for years, and we're going to have to agree to disagree on that. I don't think. I mean, the difference between people who made a crucifix or who made a cathedral and somebody submerging it in their own urine. I mean, it's very difficult to argue for that not as a complete and total degradation. I mean,
Well,
a real
yeah,
sinking.
but here's what's interesting. It's not a degradation of Christ. It's a degradation of the human that
No.
produced it. Let's be
Oh
clear
no, the
about that.
artist. Yes, right.
You can't desacralize that which is actually sacred. The human is the thing
No,
that
I
gets
mean,
warped in that maneuver, not the concept of
oh
God.
right, absolutely. Does it hurt God when you do that? No, it hurts you, and it hurts your own sense of reality. But why would there be this flight from beauty in the natural realm? And I mean, why is it, Nathan, that in the past you had a lot of signals of transcendence in art? And well, if you believe you live in a created world, you exist in that created order, whether you're a Christian or even if you're not necessarily a Christian, but you still think that the world was made and that human beings are in some sort of hierarchy or exist in some relationship to something greater than themselves, and that and you accept that most of what comes to us in life is given. That's one way of looking at the world that will produce art of transcendence, that will produce sacred art, because it depends on reverence and veneration. But if you believe, as moderns do instinctively, that no, we call the shots, nature is in our hands, and your whole worldview is centered on control and manipulation and coercion, then you're going to look at the natural. You won't look at the natural world with reverence. You'll look at it as an object for your manipulation, an object of
Yeah, but
control.
see,
That changes
but
entirely. Yeah.
yeah, and herein lies the entire internal contradiction that I see, though, is that most of your moderns don't think that humans should have control of nature, or that they're so the hierarchy. There's a category confusion here to me on this, where nature still is venerated as a place of transcendence without it imposing anything on us. And there still are an awful lot of people who are fully modern in every other sense who love bird watching on the weekend and camping and looking at the stars. So I I
Kind
don't know
of, but
that many people
there's a
who are totally consistent on this.
no, they're not. There's a deep internal contradiction here, because a lot of people who will venerate nature in a pagan sense, or just argue that environmental justice is of the utmost importance. We know that's a very huge item of concern for a lot of people who are not, outside the church, many who are in progressive circles. Well, but most of these people still do believe that it's up to us to save the world.
Sure.
So that assumption still belies a sense that human beings are ultimately in control. Even if you think, oh, we're a virus on the planet, we're destroying the natural order. Well, first of all, that's weird because we are part of the natural order. And that's where a big contradiction happens, because you have to. Yes.
Well, we have a good theology of humans' capacity to mess things up. That's pretty well baked into the way we see the world. But hey, hang on, let me take what I don't think is an aside here. Because you see a lot of attacks on old art as a climate protest. So the whole like gluing and yourself to stuff and throwing soup on things. Those are usually classic art, not modern art, because there's this thing of, why do we want to preserve this beauty if we're not willing to preserve the beauty that we have? It's interesting that there is an overlap here in the categories that we're playing with, just even in the way that things are protested. I don't know quite what to make of all of that, but I don't think it's incidental that attacking a culture's art is seen to be a way of massively protesting against the entirety of that culture.
Well, a good deal of modern art, you could call a lot of it protest art as well. So it's meant to be a shock to the system. It's meant to, and remember, modern ways of thinking are obsessed with novelty and originality. Whereas in older paradigms of artwork, you do have a stunning degree of originality and creativity, but by and large, artists were attempting to capture reality, aspects of reality.
Paint the world as it is, not as they wanted it to be.
Right. Now, a good deal of art depends on, it's all about, it's your naked self-expression. But it also, if you want to tear down old lines of thinking, ugliness is one way to do it. You take a sledgehammer to sacred objects, and a lot of art announces itself as it tries to be iconoclastic. And so the message in a lot of this seems to be, in former times, you had this naive infatuation with a transcendent God and human beings made in the image of God, but we're going to shine a bright spotlight on the hollowness of all of that and the emptiness of all of that, and tear it down to liberate you from this sad, benighted vision that's keeping you chained down. So, these are very broad ways to categorize a lot of that, but that's why I think a lot of people are deeply suspicious when they think of beauty tied to artistic expression, because so much artistic expression is hostile to the church, and it's very ugly, deliberately so.
Yeah, so that's what I want to ask you next. Can you give, and maybe this is a good place to end, perhaps, can you give us some words of encouragement and some words of caution for the church as it relates to this topic?
Well, let's start with some words of caution. So one of the major issues that we encounter when we look at, let's go back to how you decorate your home. So we're not all interior decorators and designers of exquisite taste. I often think about Steve Jobs when I read the Walter Isaacson biography of him, and it talked about how he had one home. He was so meticulous and exacting in his taste that he never fully furnished one of his homes, because none of the furnishings were up to his standards. I just think that's, and he did have the man did have some pretty powerful taste. I'm not the biggest Steve Jobs fan, but he had some pretty immaculate taste in some ways. Well, that's not all of us. So I don't want to fall into that elitism charge again, but we need to bring in a word here that's hard to define, but most of us know it when we see it. And that word is kitsch. It's a German word. A lot of our homes, and this is not just Christians, a lot of our homes are filled with what we would call kitsch. The best way to describe kitsch would be a work of art that offers false consolation, or a kind of cheap comfort, or a kind of sanitized vision of reality. I'm not sure that we're going to have to get so specific. We always have to pick on Thomas Kincaid, but he's the clearest example to point to. And I've said nice words about Kincaid before, and I know, they had a staggering statistic about how many people in America had a Thomas Kincaid painting in their homes, but it's massive. I mean, I had no idea how popular his work was. Oh my goodness, yeah, and continues to be. This is it's a striking contrast to the tragic circumstances of his life. He died an alcoholic. It's very sad. But so okay, I can hear some of you listening. What's wrong with with Thomas Kincaid paintings? They're comforting. They're very colorful. They offer. I mean, don't they just give you a lot of? I mean, I remember being in a long discussion with a group of people when we were teaching on the arts, and there were some very passionate defenders of Thomas Kincaid. But the main issue there is that they're offering you these paintings, I would argue, an idealized vision of reality. Now, just think about the contrast of even just if you have just a simple cross in your home. What is a cross? I mean, it's a Roman instrument of torture and humiliation. It has been redeemed as a symbol. And that's just one of the astonishing features of Christianity because of Christ on the cross. But even in a simple, unadorned cross, I'm not even talking about a crucifix, just a cross, you have a more holistic vision of reality that includes the darkness of this world, but also doesn't overlook the fact that the darkness has been overcome and defeated decisively. Jesus is not on that cross because he's risen. So a cross now, but in stark contrast to that, you have these visions, these very colorful Lisa Frank levels of color images from Thomas Kincaid that give you an idealized vision of reality that exclude the fallen aspects. And my caution to a lot of yeah.
Well, I was going to say though, is this again back to play the other side here? That for people who do live, their deep felt experience is in the chaos and the darkness. Is there a role for art to be just a sense of hope? That the artwork itself doesn't have to contain both. It is a vision into, because I mean, I would say that 95% of things we look at on our phone or computer do exactly the same thing. As we're trying to find glimmers of distraction from the life that we're
happy distractions
living. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this: to fill your life with distractions, which we have in more abundance than ever, does that really help us in gaining real hope? Or
so
to fill our homes?
Yeah, so I think only to the cross point, the cross does point to something that does give us legitimate hope. But you also can't have enough cats to give you hope. So what you fill your home with does.
But cats die, and so do puppies. And so part of what I want to caution against in paintings that give you idealized visions, what I want to caution against is that those such things can take you out of touch with reality, and they can also lead to a sentimental view of reality, which actually ironically undermines true hope and doesn't help. Now, am I saying that we need confrontational art objects in our homes or that we need to carefully scrutinize everything? No. But I am saying, I'm just going to give you a more holistic, I think you have a more holistic vision in some of the modern Flemish painters, the Dutch painters, landscape painters, because in their landscapes, you often have beautiful landscapes, but you also have dead trees or old woodsheds that are rotting,
storm clouds,
and they're integrated. Storm clouds and you also have sometimes unnatural shafts of light coming down from the heavens onto this fallen world. So it's all there. You have beauty and abundance, but you also have decay, and you have pictures that, I mean, it's integrated into the vision that this is a fallen world, but you have transcendent hope even breaking into these paintings as well. Those in a home, I think, make for a much better kind of furnishing than a Thomas Kincaid painting, and they offer you a better hope. So my encouragement to Christians is, when we think about beauty, we need to recognize it as something that obviously goes beyond the walls of the gallery. It has to. It's not the artists don't have a monopoly on it at all. That artistic expressions just give us a clear way to lock onto beauty as a topic. But beauty is a basic human need. I mean, we could have done a whole podcast on this, but my encouragement, it's just a basic human need in the sense that we all, if there's a reason why, if you go to even the most impoverished regions, if you go to the slums of Nairobi, people still have gardens and still have potted flowers and plants.
Mm-hmm.
Frederick Buechner says, beauty is to the soul what food is to the flesh. And that's right. So it's something that we all need. Most of us, and it's, for the most part, it's most beauty, the vast majority of it is totally free. You don't need to.
Yeah,
you don't need to be a collector, or you go to a museum. You just walk outside or look at your children, or it's all there.
The one of the things that I appreciate is, well, there's a lot of weird things about the church I'm part of, but one of the things I appreciate is, I would say that at least, three out of four, if not more, Sundays per month, when we're doing our times of praises and sharing, somebody will refer to something about blooming trees, about spring. There will be a prayer of thanksgiving for the phenomenal beauty of the natural world in which we get to live and inhabit. And that seems right to me, to celebrate beauty that isn't humanly contrived or constructed. I think that's a healthy expression also of the ability to see beauty outside of the purely human realm. I think that's a good practice for us on multiple levels.
Well, much more could be said on the subject. We've talked about beauty before. I'm sure we'll return to it again. But thanks for tracking with us. You've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.